The whispers started before she even reached the altar. A sharp voice carried across the room. "She doesn't even look like she belongs here." Another guest, emboldened by the murmurs, let out a cruel laugh and whispered louder than a whisper should ever be. "Imagine marrying a woman that dark on your wedding day." The words hit her harder than the weight of her gown. She stood in the doorway, the black bride framed by golden light pouring through the stained glass windows, her ivory dress flowing like a river around her feet. For a moment the room seemed hushed, not in admiration, but in judgment. She could feel their stares pressing against her skin like invisible hands, pulling at her dignity, stripping her moment of its purity. Her heart thudded as if it might betray her calm face, but she pressed her lips into the faintest smile and stepped forward. The hall was beautifully decorated. Tall vases of lilies, strings of fairy lights, and rows of white chairs filled with faces that refused to look at her with joy. A few people turned away quickly, caught in their own shame for being caught staring. Others leaned toward each other, muttering things they thought she couldn't hear. Yet every syllable reached her ears. Too dark for a wedding dress. Why didn't he choose someone different? She had dreamed of this day since she was a girl. Not in the fairy tale sense, not with castles or tiaras, but with the image of walking down an aisle toward someone who truly saw her. That dream was here, unfolding, yet tainted by the cruel undercurrent of prejudice disguised as small whispers. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet. She thought of her mother sitting in the second row, her eyes glistening with both pride and worry. She thought of her grandmother's words. "Dignity is not given, it's carried." With those words echoing inside her, she placed one foot in front of the other. The bridesmaids looked uneasy, sensing the tension but powerless to silence it. The groom, waiting at the altar, shifted slightly, his eyes never leaving hers, silently willing her strength. She lifted her chin. She would not let them see her break. Some guests smirked, others whispered behind fans or programs, but she kept walking. Each step was measured, graceful, defiant. She wasn't just walking toward her husband. She was walking through centuries of judgment. Every whisper a ghost of history reminding her of what she was expected not to be. By the time she reached halfway down the aisle, her chest had steadied. The cruelty around her hadn't stopped, but something within her had risen above it. The stares were still there, but so was she, unshaken, dressed in white, carrying more than a bouquet. She didn't speak, didn't glare, didn't falter. She simply existed in her beauty, and that was enough to quiet at least a few whispers. For in that silence, her presence was beginning to demand respect, even if they weren't ready to admit it. Follow for the next part, and like if you stand with her courage. The ceremony ended, but the whispers did not. If anything, they grew sharper in the spaces where the bride could hear them most clearly, during the walk to the reception hall, as she paused for photographs, as she sat at the long table beside her groom. Each smile she gave was carefully measured, a mask she wore so no one could see the ache building inside her. At the reception, chandeliers cast warm light across round tables adorned with roses and white linens. Yet even that golden glow could not soften the edges of hostility she felt. Groups of guests huddled together, laughing, though their eyes cut toward her like knives. When she approached, their laughter ceased, replaced by a silence too heavy to be polite. Her mother sat a few tables away, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had chosen her finest dress, a deep emerald green that shimmered under the lights, but her face betrayed her unease. She could hear the mutters, too, words like "poor choice" and "doesn't fit in." Each word bruised her spirit, not for herself, but for her daughter, who deserved a day of joy untainted by cruelty. The bride's groom leaned close, whispering, "Ignore them. They don't matter." His voice was steady, but his jaw was clenched. He had heard enough to know what was being said, but he also knew this was her fight as much as his. Anger flashed in his eyes, yet he refused to let it erupt here, in front of her. Still, the remarks found their way through. "She looks different from what I imagined. Her skin just doesn't match the dress. Do you think their children will—" The words drifted like smoke, clinging, choking the air. She kept her smile fixed as guests approached, some offering congratulations too brightly, their compliments hollow and forced. A woman leaned in to say, "You're brave, marrying into this family." The bride felt her stomach twist. Brave was not the word she wanted on her wedding day. Her bridesmaids tried to distract her, chatting, clinking glasses, but their eyes betrayed pity. Pity was worse than cruelty. Pity meant they saw her pain and felt helpless. Her mother finally rose from her seat and made her way to the bride's side, laying a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You are beautiful, my darling," she whispered, her voice steady, though her eyes glistened. The bride nodded, swallowing hard against the tears that threatened to undo her. As the first dance began, she moved across the floor with her groom. Their steps were slow, graceful, yet she felt dozens of eyes watching, judging. She wanted to sink into the music, to let the melody carry her away, but the whispers hummed louder than the violins. She pressed her cheek against her husband's shoulder, hiding her face, not from him, but from them. By the time dessert was served, the strain was visible. Her posture was perfect, but her shoulders ached from holding them so straight. Her smile never faltered, but her cheeks burned from the effort of keeping it in place. The joy of her wedding day was being stolen piece by piece, not by one act of cruelty, but by countless tiny cuts that bled her spirit. She caught her reflection in the glass of the reception hall doors. For a moment, she didn't see a bride. She saw a woman being tested, pushed, forced to prove herself where no proof should have been required. Her mother noticed too. Sitting once more at her table, she whispered to herself, "They will not break her. They cannot." Yet her own hands shook, betraying the fury she kept bottled for the sake of her daughter's dignity. The whispers never fully stopped. They trailed her like shadows, clinging through toasts, photographs, even as music filled the air. Yet with each passing hour, something stirred inside her, a quiet resolve, a gathering strength. She knew the moment was coming when she could no longer remain silent. Like if you believe love deserves respect, no matter the color. The music swelled again, but it could not drown out the murmurs. The bride sat at the long reception table, her fingers pressed lightly to the stem of her glass, her eyes tracing the faces around her. Every laugh that lingered too long, every tilted glance, every hand cupped around a whisper carved into her resolve. She had endured hours of being measured against their prejudice, hours of carrying grace under fire. But something inside her now shifted, like a flame starved of air that suddenly found oxygen. It happened when one of the groom's aunts, emboldened by wine and company, leaned across the table and said with a smirk that wasn't quite hidden, "She looks more like the help than the bride." The word struck the room like a dropped dish, shattering the fragile civility that had been stretched across the night. Her mother stiffened instantly, her lips parting in outrage but her voice catching in her throat. The groom's jaw tightened, his fist curling beneath the tablecloth, but before he could speak, the bride herself slowly rose from her chair. The scraping sound of the chair legs against the polished floor cut through the chatter. One by one, heads turned toward her. The bride's white gown shimmered beneath the chandelier, and her shadow stretched long across the marble tiles, as if even the light bowed to her presence. She stood tall, bouquet still in hand, though the flowers trembled slightly with the pulse in her wrist. For a moment, she said nothing. The silence became heavier than any whisper. Some smirked, certain she would crumble. Others leaned forward, curious to see whether the woman they had mocked would walk away in shame. But she did neither. Her eyes swept the room, meeting gaze after gaze, until the laughter that once filled the corners of the hall died into uneasy quiet. She raised her glass slowly, the crystal catching the light. When she spoke, her voice carried with a calm steadiness that surprised even her. "I've heard every word tonight," she began. "Every whisper, every laugh meant to cut. I've heard you question if I belong, if I am worthy to wear this dress, to stand beside the man I love. And I'll tell you the truth." She paused. The suspense was unbearable. Forks clinked against plates as trembling hands set them down. Eyes that had once mocked now stared, transfixed. "The truth is that I didn't come here to prove myself to anyone. I didn't stand in this gown, on this day, to win approval from voices too small to rise above a whisper. I came here because love chose me, and love does not bow to prejudice. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't cruel, it was stunned. Her groom's eyes never left her, pride shining behind the storm that had threatened to erupt earlier. Her mother's tears fell freely now, not from humiliation, but from the pride swelling in her chest. The bride lifted her chin higher. You see me as too dark, too different. But what you call different, I call radiant. What you try to shame, I hold with pride. My skin, my history, my bloodline, they are not stains. They are strength. And today, that strength walks in white. The hall seemed to breathe with her words, as though the very walls had leaned closer to listen. She lowered her glass, the crystal ringing softly against the table. And if any of you believe this marriage is a mistake, she continued, her voice steady as steel, then I pity you. Because what you cannot understand is that love is the only truth that matters in this room. Love brought us here. Love will carry us forward. And nothing you whisper can silence that. Silence followed, but it was not the silence of mockery. It was the silence of reckoning. Eyes that had once sneered now looked away in shame. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One man cleared his throat as though trying to wash away his own guilt. Even the aunt who had spoken so cruelly earlier stared at her lap, her face red, her smirk gone. The bride sat down slowly, her body trembling, but her face serene. Her groom took her hand beneath the table, squeezing it firmly, his pride unspoken but radiant in his eyes. Her mother dabbed her cheeks with a napkin, whispering softly to herself, "She did it." She did not bend. Then, as if on cue, the band began to play again, soft at first, then swelling into something fuller. But the atmosphere had changed. The whispers had vanished. In their place was an uneasy respect, one that had not been given but commanded. The bride had not only stunned the crowd, she had silenced them. The hall was still heavy with silence when the bride lowered her glass. It was not the same silence that had haunted her steps down the aisle earlier. This was different. This was the silence of people stripped bare of their cruelty, forced to face themselves in the mirror she had just held up before them. She had spoken, and her words had settled like stones in still water, rippling outward until no whisper dared disturb the surface. Her groom leaned closer, his hand warm around hers. "You were brilliant," he whispered, his voice catching with emotion. He had been prepared to defend her all night, to burn bridges with his own family if he had to. But she had stood tall before he could even rise. She had not needed saving. She had saved the night herself. Her mother, seated just a few chairs away, could no longer hold back her tears. They ran freely now, glistening on her cheeks as she pressed a trembling hand to her lips. For months, she had feared this moment, feared that her daughter would be broken under the weight of judgment. But as she looked at the woman in the white gown, she knew those fears had been misplaced. Her daughter had not been broken. She had been refined like gold in fire. Slowly, the room began to shift. A cousin who had avoided the bride all night rose from her seat and walked toward the table, her steps hesitant. She stopped before the bride, cleared her throat, and said softly, "You look beautiful tonight. I was wrong to doubt you." The words were awkward, but they were genuine. The bride nodded, her face calm, her reply simple. "Thank you." Others did not come forward with apologies, but their stares softened. The smirks had vanished, replaced with downcast eyes and nervous fidgeting. It was not love, not yet, but it was the first step toward respect. The band shifted into a slower song, and the groom extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked, smiling in a way that reached his eyes. She took his hand, and together they moved onto the dance floor once more. This time, the air was different. When they swayed to the rhythm, guests did not whisper. They watched. Some even clapped gently in time with the music. The bride felt her body relax for the first time that evening, her cheek resting against her husband's shoulder, the fear and humiliation of the day loosening their grip on her heart. As the song carried them, she caught sight of her mother standing now, her hands clasped together, pride shining brighter than the chandelier above. Their eyes met, And in that moment, no words were needed. The mother's silent message was clear. You are everything I dreamed you would be. Strong, unshaken, radiant. When the music ended, applause filled the hall, hesitant at first, then swelling into something full. For once it was not forced, not laced with cruelty. It was genuine recognition. The bride smiled, not because she needed their approval, but because she had claimed her dignity, and no one could take it from her. The rest of the evening unfolded with new lightness. Conversations softened, laughter lost its edge, and even the aunt who had spoken so cruelly earlier avoided the bride's eyes with a shame she could not hide. The bride did not demand apologies, nor did she relish in their discomfort. Her victory was not in their remorse, but in her own unbroken spirit. As the night drew to a close, the bride stood beside her husband, gazing at the fading glow of the chandeliers. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, not just the wedding day, but the lifetime of whispers, of stares, of being told she did not belong. Tonight had been the culmination of all those battles, and she had won, not by lashing out, but by standing in truth. She turned to her groom, her voice quiet but certain. They tried to shame me, but tonight I learned something. I don't need their acceptance. My dignity is my own. He kissed her forehead, pulling her close. And it's more radiant than anything in this room. Her mother approached then, placing a hand on her daughter's arm. You carried yourself with grace, child, she said. You didn't just marry a man today. You married courage, dignity, and history. You showed them all who you are. The bride closed her eyes for a moment, letting those words sink deep. She knew her wedding day would be remembered, not for the whispers that tried to ruin it, but for the strength that silenced them. And as the final guests drifted away into the night, the hall echoing with the memory of music and applause, the lesson remained clear. Dignity cannot be given or taken. It must be lived, carried, and defended. In the face of cruelty, it stands taller than hate. On that night, a bride had not just stunned the crowd, she had transformed them, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than prejudice ever could. Like if you believe love and dignity always outshine hate.